Hello everyone! Today we're going to see a high-level overview of OnePlan. I'm logged into OnePlan and I'm looking at my portfolio view of all my projects and the status of those projects. If I want to do so, I can add a new project just by hitting the new button here and then following the screens to go through it. The very first thing that you'll have to do is come in and fill in some information like what portfolio is this related to, what program, who's the manager, so on and so forth, any other information that you require before you can move on. As we're going through the process flow here, we can send out notifications, we can require approvals, and require people to fill in any information that may be needed before they can move on. One of the very first things that we may need to do is go and build out a high-level resource plan. I can build out that resource plan using generic resources here if I don't yet know who I'm going to need, or I can come in and say find resources and find people who are available of the right roles and skills and utilize them in my resource plan as it makes sense. After I've built my high-level resource plan, I can come in and build out my high-level financial plan or my budget. The first step of that is I can hit import here and it will build out my financial costs for me from a labor perspective based off of the resource plan that I just keyed in and blended rates that I would have set up beforehand. I can then key in any other costs like travel and expenses, contracts, software, other, and I let that all roll up so I can see it's going to take me $620,000-ish to do this particular project. Later on, we can compare these to things like our forecast or our actual costs to see if we're on track, over budget, or not, utilizing the heat map here, as well as even show a variance between those so we can very easily see how far we're off from what we initially had planned. Once you've built out your resource plan, your financials, and filled in some high-level business case information, then you can then come in and use the portfolio analysis module to do some what-if analysis around which projects can we do, when can we do them, and really start to lay out my roadmap of when these things can be done. So I'll flip here over into my portfolio analysis mode and I can start to do some high-level prioritization. To do that prioritization, I can look at information here like my prioritization score and other information like budget, benefits, maybe I want IRRs, NPVs, and other financial metrics. I can put whatever information I want into the view here, and based off of that information, I can simply drag and drop to adjust priority. The high ones at the top are my highest priorities, and down at the bottom is my lowest priorities, and then everything in between, just based off of a simple drag and drop stack rank order. Once I've got my priorities in line, I can then take a look at what this is going to look like from a timing perspective, and come in and pop open my Gantt view here, and start to see how these things are laid out. This is where people are asking for things to be done today, but we may not be able to do those within our constraints. We only have so much money, we only have so much resources. So the first constraint I'll look at here is the money side of things, or my budget. Based off of the budgets that have been filled in for all these projects, if we do them when people are asking them to be done, we can compare that against our target, like my fiscal year 2020 target, and you can see we're going to have some problems from July out to October. To resolve those problems, I can go down to some of my lower priority projects down here at the bottom and say, what if we don't do these projects? I can uncheck them and or put them on hold if they're already an active in-flight project, and you'll see how that affects my budget accordingly. And or we can simply drag and drop and stagger these projects a little bit better. What if I start some of these lower priority projects a quarter later, a couple quarters later, a year later, and start to really build out a plan of when we can do these projects based off of priority and staying within our budget. I can then do the same on the resource side of things and take a look at all my resources and how this plan will affect my resources and do my what-if scenarios accordingly as such. Once I get a scenario that I like, that works for both my financials and my resources, I can save those scenarios and come back to it at any point in the future. I'll then lock in a particular scenario and start to go and execute on those particular projects. Within the portfolio analysis module, I also have a high-level Kanban view showing me all of my different projects, what status that they're in. And there's also a roadmap view in here, so if I need to communicate to stakeholders, to customers, etc., which particular projects we're doing, when we're doing them, what's the status of them, I can see that all in here, as well as you can even see the relationships between any particular projects if you had created those earlier on. From there, I'm going to go ahead and go into one of my projects, that social networking project. It's now been approved, it's been selected, we've laid out when it's going to start, and the very first thing I need to do is come in and build out my high-level schedule. To do that, I can use the online planner right here within OnePlan. It's all an editable grid, and I can fill things in, create my predecessors, successors, and so on and so forth, and build out my schedule as such. And or start from a template if you want to start from some best practices. If you choose to do so though, you can also utilize Project for the Web, the Office 365 Planner, or Project Professional Desktop to build out your schedule and then publish those in. If your project lends itself better to being managed in an agile way, then you can come in and you can either build out your backlog of items in here, or you can connect up to Jira or Azure DevOps and utilize those to build out your backlog and manage the actual execution of the projects, but let that information sync back in for status and resourcing purposes later on. Once you've built out your plan, and you can track things like issues, changes, and risks in here, then we can start to generate status reports on these items as people are working on them. So every week, every month, whatever frequency you set up, you can come into a particular status report. You can get a snapshot of all the information that's going on, fill in any of the other narrative that you may want, like accomplished activities, planned, etc., and submit that status report to managers, executives, customers, whoever may need it. As you're working on these projects, team members can come into the My Work area here. They'll get notified when tasks have been assigned to them, or issues or risks or any of the different work items. They'll be able to then update the status of them right here, and that will automatically go back to the project manager who assigned it to them. If you need to do so, you can also utilize the timesheet functionality within OnePlan to fill in your time on these different tasks and issues and risks and changes and such that you might be working on, and let that all roll up back into the projects to generate actual hours as well as actual costs. If you need more robust reporting, then within the portfolio module here, you can utilize Power BI to build out reports to show things in all different ways. In fact, we have an out-of-the-box Power BI report pack that pulls from the OnePlan data and shows many reports that you may already be looking for. Things like an overall view of all of your projects, the status of those, budgets versus forecasts versus actuals, etc. You may be more interested in looking at costs, and we have reports built for that out of the box here, and or resource reports, or into the details of different issues, risks, changes, so on and so forth. So we have a pre-built set of reports that you can start from, but if you have Power BI knowledge, then you can go and build out more reports as such to show any of this data in any which way that you might want. That way you can get better visibility into all of your different projects, the resources, the costs, and such that are going on within them.